So you've been to the flea market and picked up this really great old radio. Except you can't think of what to do with it. Well, that's because you don't know Dick. Hi, I'm Dick, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with this old radio and that bass amplifier over there. So, let's get started.
You know, back in its day, this 1940s radio would have been the equivalent of maybe a 120-inch screen TV, a place where the family could gather around and listen to the exciting sounds of Benny Goodman and his orchestra, or maybe the adventures of the Lone Ranger. But those days have come and gone, so it's time for this radio to be repurposed. While I was taking it apart, I was quite surprised to find a penny. I thought it'd be from 1940 or something, but actually it was from 1971. What I was disappointed in finding was mouse poop. Not cool. So after 80 years, it was time to give this radio a good cleaning, which I did. As I was disassembling the grill cover, which I wanted to reuse by the way, but was very disappointed to find that it was beyond repair. I was also surprised to see that it was glued on to cardboard. They sure don't make them like they used to, do they? Taking apart the amplifier was pretty straightforward, removing a few screws here and there and disconnecting a few wires. It was really pretty simple. Once I had the amplifier out, I double-checked it to make sure it would fit into the space of the radio. I knew I'd have to rebuild the front of the radio to accommodate the new amplifier. So I took apart all the components that allowed me to do that. I used a heat gun to remove some of the backing blocks, and when that didn't work, I used a multi-cutting tool, and then I got really serious with a reciprocating saw. And that solved all my problems of removing the front. I was ready to start rebuilding the front face of the radio, but there was a part I needed from the old one. So I heated it with an iron and simply removed it once the glue was soft enough. I traced the existing front onto a piece of 1/8-inch plywood and then cut it out on my bandsaw. After a bit of sanding, I gave it a quick check to make sure that it would fit properly. I measured and marked the location of where I needed the new amplifier to fit in the front face. I made myself a router jig out of 1-inch MDF. I glued and clamped it together, and while I was waiting for glue to dry, I decided to drill a couple of holes into the front face and do a few relief cuts to get rid of excess material. Next, I took my router and using my jig, I trimmed the piece of plywood for the new front. A perfect cut. Because the plywood doesn't look that good, I decided to put a maple veneer on top of it. I traced out the shape and pattern and cut off the excess, then applied a liberal amount of glue to the veneer. I placed my plywood cutout on top of the veneer and then took it to my press. I let it sit overnight, and the next day, once the glue was dry, I trimmed and removed all the excess material. I did some filing to finish the fine edges and some sanding. Then I glued on the old piece which I had removed from the old front. While I was waiting for glue to dry, I decided it was a good time to make myself my new speaker front. I marked the center of the piece I cut and checked the diameter of the size of the hole I needed. I used a jig that I made for my laminate router to cut a perfect hole. Fits perfect. I drilled and countersunk a few holes into the back of this panel so that I could attach it to the radio. I did a quick test fit and double-checked everything to make sure it would fit properly. The problem with the new front was it was new, so I threw everything at it that I had. I mean, really, keys, pliers, hit it with a hammer, and remember that old penny? Yep, used it too. That penny took a pounding, but I think it was worth it. Next, I applied an alcohol-based stain and kept mixing the colors until I got exactly what I wanted. I had a piece of wood left over from another project and I thought it would look good on this radio. So I stained it a bit darker and applied it with some glue. Next, it was off to the spray booth for a couple of coats of clear lacquer. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I used an aerosol spray adhesive to attach the grill cloth to the speaker front. After about 10 minutes, the two of them were ready to be joined together. I trimmed off all the excess material, and here you go, new grill cover. There were still a few parts on the old amplifier casing that I could repurpose, and one of them was the feet, which I attached to the radio. Next, I had to build a new housing for the amplifier. I used a few cleats, a lot of glue, and a few clamps to make sure it stayed in place. While I was waiting for glue to dry, I decided to do some wiring. I needed to extend the power cord from the original amplifier. Next, I built the speaker box. I kept all the same dimensions from the original amplifier box. Once that was built, it was time to put the amplifier back together into this old radio. I started to reassemble all the components I took apart earlier. The new speaker box and grill cloth fit perfectly. Before I closed up the back of this amplifier, I wanted to put some handles on it to make it easier to move around. The local hardware store had exactly what I needed. Now that everything's been installed, it's time for me to close the back. I cut myself a piece of 1/8 inch plywood and marked where I needed the power supply to go. With all the connections soldered to the power supply, it was time to put on the back. I wanted to pay a bit of a tribute to the old radio, so I took off the plate that had the model and serial number on it and repurposed it and placed it on the front of the cabinet. Then I added just a little personal touch to this project.
Well, she's all done, and I think it looks really great. And for those of you wondering what's going on with that piece of laminate behind me, and what's he gonna do next, and you can't figure it out, that's because you don't know Dick.